I never thought I'd be the kind of person who celebrates someone else's misfortune. Yet here I am, sipping champagne while scrolling through photos of my mother-in-law's tear-streaked face as she's escorted from her company's headquarters. The security guard's hand on her elbow, her designer purse clutched against her chest like a shield, and the unmistakable look of someone whose world has just imploded. 3 years of psychological warfare had finally come full circle, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't enjoying every second of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It all started when I married Michael, the golden boy of the Harris family. Sorry, not Harris, the Peterson family. Michael was the pride and joy of Eleanor Peterson, a high-powered executive at one of Boston's most prestigious investment firms. Eleanor had Michael's life mapped out from the moment he was born: Harvard Business School, then joining her at the firm, eventually taking over when she retired. There was just one problem with this perfect plan: Michael wanted to be a pediatric surgeon, and then there was me, Alison Webb, daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse from a small town in Michigan. I had no pedigree, no connections, no trust fund. Just a master's degree in hospital administration and a work ethic that had propelled me to a management position at Boston Children's Hospital by age 28. That's where I met Michael during his residency. The first time Michael brought me home to meet his parents, I knew something was off. Eleanor Peterson wore her disapproval like an expensive perfume, subtle but unmistakable. She greeted me with a smile that never reached her eyes, her handshake firm but cold. Her husband Thomas, a mild-mannered architect, seemed pleasant enough, but it was clear who controlled the family dynamic. "So, Alison," Eleanor said during dinner, swirling her wine glass with manicured fingers. "Hospital administration. That's practical. Did you ever consider going to medical school? Or business school?" "Mom, not everyone wants to follow your career path," Michael interjected. "I'm just making conversation, darling," she replied with a tightness in her voice that spoke volumes. It was the first of many thinly veiled critiques, but I'd grown up with 4 brothers. I knew how to handle myself. What I didn't know was that Eleanor Peterson didn't just disapprove of me, she saw me as an active threat to her perfectly orchestrated life plan. The wedding planning was my first real taste of Eleanor's tactics. She insisted on being involved in every detail, just to help, but her help consisted of repeatedly suggesting venues that were conveniently booked for our dates, recommending caterers who unfortunately had minimum budgets far beyond what we'd planned to spend, and constantly reminding us how her connections could have made everything so much easier if only we'd let her take control. When we finally settled on a beautiful lakeside venue in Vermont, paid for mostly by Michael and me, Eleanor managed to accidentally send our custom invitations with the wrong date printed on them. Half our guests received corrections and apologies, creating exactly the kind of confusion and perception of disorganization that Eleanor had subtly been suggesting would happen without her oversight. "These things happen when you try to do everything yourself," she said with a sympathetic smile that made my blood boil. I later found out she'd called the printer personally to confirm the date change, claiming to be my assistant. After the wedding, I thought things would improve. Michael had completed his residency and accepted a position at the same hospital where I worked. We bought a small but charming colonial house in a good school district, just a 30-minute drive from the Petersons. Close enough for occasional family dinners, far enough to maintain our sanity. For the first year of our marriage, Eleanor's undermining was subtle. She'd call Michael at odd hours with emergencies that usually turned out to be minor issues. She'd drop by unannounced when she knew he was home but I was at work. She'd send us articles about couples who worked together and the strain it put on their marriages. "I'm just concerned," she'd say whenever Michael confronted her. "You two spend so much time together at work, and now at home. It's not healthy to have no separation." The fact that we loved working at the same hospital, that we'd built a circle of friends there, that we rarely even saw each other during work hours because our departments were on opposite sides of the campus, none of that mattered to Eleanor. In her mind, I had corrupted her son's perfect future, and she was determined to correct the course. Things escalated when I got pregnant with twins. The news should have been joyous, but Eleanor managed to taint even that. During what should have been a celebratory dinner, she turned to Michael and said, "Twins will be such a handful, especially with both of you working. Maybe this is a sign that one of you should consider a change." We all knew which one of us she meant. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. At 16 weeks, I began experiencing complications that required me to reduce my hours. My boss was understanding, but the adjustment meant more work for my team. I felt guilty, stressed, and physically exhausted. That's when Eleanor made her first major move. She had connections on the hospital board and used them to raise concerns about nepotism and favoritism in my department. She claimed several staff members had approached her, none had, with complaints that I was neglecting my duties while Michael covered for me. An internal review was initiated. Though it found no evidence of wrongdoing, the investigation created exactly the kind of stress my doctor had warned me to avoid. I ended up on complete bed rest for the remainder of my pregnancy, effectively removing me from the workplace, exactly what Eleanor had wanted. The twins, Emma and Ethan, were born 7 weeks premature. The NICU became our second home for the next month. Michael took family leave to be with me and the babies, which only seemed to fuel Eleanor's resentment. She visited the hospital daily, ostensibly to support us, but each visit included some subtle criticism of my condition, my choices, or my ability to mother premature infants. "It's so fortunate that the hospital has such excellent staff," she commented one afternoon while watching a nurse show me how to properly hold Emma for feeding. "Some mothers just naturally know what to do, but there's no shame in needing extra help." The twins finally came home, and for a brief time, Eleanor seemed to back off. She even offered to help with childcare once a week so I could get back on my feet. Desperate for support and hopeful that becoming a grandmother had softened her, I accepted. That was my second mistake. The first had been marrying her son. Eleanor's weekly help became a Trojan horse. She'd rearrange the nursery because the layout I'd chosen was inefficient. She'd rewash clothes I'd already laundered because she didn't trust my detergent choice. She'd question our pediatrician's recommendations and send us articles supporting her own theories on childcare. Michael saw the pattern but felt torn. "She means well," he'd say. "She's just used to being in control." But I could see the strain in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders whenever his mother called. When the twins were 6 months old, I returned to work part-time. We'd hired a nanny, a lovely woman named Diane who had 15 years of experience and came with impeccable references. Eleanor insisted on interviewing her personally, which I agreed to mainly to keep the peace. 2 weeks after Diane started, small things began disappearing from our home. First it was a silver frame with our wedding photo. Then a pair of diamond earrings Michael had given me for our anniversary. Then cash from the emergency fund we kept in a drawer. Eleanor was the first to suggest that perhaps Diane wasn't as trustworthy as her references claimed. "These things happen," she said with that same sympathetic smile. "It's so hard to find good help these days." I was devastated and confused. I'd vetted Diane thoroughly, and she'd seemed so genuine. But the evidence was mounting, and eventually, we felt we had no choice but to let her go. Eleanor immediately suggested her friend's daughter, Jessica, who was between jobs and loved children. Left with few options and 2 infants who needed care, we hired Jessica. Jessica was perfectly pleasant to our faces, but something felt off. The twins, who had been thriving with Diane, became fussy and irritable. They cried when Jessica picked them up and seemed almost afraid of her. When I mentioned this to Eleanor, she shrugged it off. "Babies are sensitive to change," she said. "They'll adjust." But they didn't adjust. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. So I did something I'm not proud of. I installed a nanny cam without telling anyone but Michael. What I saw shattered me. Jessica wasn't physically abusing the twins, but she was neglecting them. She'd leave them crying in their cribs while she talked on the phone or watched TV. She'd prop bottles instead of holding the babies for feedings. And most disturbing of all, she was going through our personal belongings when we weren't home. The final straw came when I watched her take a call from Eleanor. "Yes, Mrs. Peterson, I checked her calendar like you asked. She has a meeting with the department head tomorrow at 2. No, I don't think he suspects anything." I rewatched that clip 5 times, my hands shaking. Then I called Michael and asked him to come home immediately. That night, after the twins were asleep, we had a long, painful conversation. I showed Michael the footage and explained my suspicions, that his mother had orchestrated the thefts to discredit Diane, then planted Jessica in our home as a spy and saboteur. At first, he was in denial. The idea that his own mother would go to such lengths seemed impossible to him. But as he watched more footage, the truth became undeniable. "I need to confront her," he said, his voice hollow. "No," I replied. "Not yet. We need to understand what she's trying to do first." The next day, instead of going to my supposed meeting with the department head, I worked from home, hidden in our bedroom while Michael took the twins to the pediatrician, another appointment Eleanor had been informed of. As expected, Jessica immediately began snooping. She accessed my laptop, which I'd deliberately left open, photographed documents from my work bag, and made a phone call. "Mrs. Peterson?" "Yes, I found some interesting emails. She's apparently been meeting with HR about a position in the new satellite clinic in Providence." "Yes, it's about a 90-minute commute from here." "No, I don't think she's told Michael yet." That was the smoking gun. I'd never applied for a position in Providence. The only way Jessica could have found such emails was if they'd been planted there during one of her snooping sessions. Eleanor was trying to create friction in our marriage by making it seem like I was planning a major career move without consulting my husband. When Michael returned, we fired Jessica on the spot. She protested, threatened to call Eleanor, and finally left in tears when Michael mentioned potential legal action for invasion of privacy. That night, we turned off our phones and stayed up late strategizing. This wasn't just about Eleanor's disapproval anymore. This was calculated psychological warfare, and it had to stop. "I need to cut her off," Michael said, his expression grave. "Completely. That's what she wants," I realized aloud. "She wants to create a situation where you have to choose between us, and she's betting you'll choose your family of origin over the family we've created." We needed a different approach. One that would end Eleanor's campaign against me without destroying Michael's relationship with his parents. Because despite everything, I knew he loved them. And our children deserved to know their grandparents, just not the toxic version of Eleanor that was currently terrorizing our lives. That's when I had an idea so audacious, so potentially catastrophic, that I almost dismissed it immediately. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like our only option. "What if," I said slowly, "we let her think she's winning?" The plan was risky. For it to work, Michael would have to pretend to be increasingly disillusioned with our marriage. He would confide in his mother about fictional problems between us, seek her advice, and gradually give her the impression that her manipulations were working. Meanwhile, I would appear increasingly frazzled and defensive, reinforcing Eleanor's belief that I was cracking under pressure. It was an exhausting charade. For 6 months, we lived a double life. In public and whenever Eleanor might be watching, we played our parts. Michael became distant and critical. I became emotional and reactive. We had staged arguments in restaurants where Eleanor's friends might see us. Michael began spending more time at his parents' house, pretending to need space. Eleanor was thrilled. She became the supportive mother, the voice of reason, the shoulder for her son to cry on. And in her triumph, she became careless. She began sharing information with Michael that she shouldn't have known, details about my work schedule, conversations I'd had with friends, even medical appointments I'd scheduled. It confirmed what we'd suspected: she'd been spying on me all along, probably through multiple channels. The worst revelation came when Michael discovered that Eleanor had been accessing my private medical records through a connection at the hospital where she sat on the board. This wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. We had finally found her weakness. Eleanor Peterson, the impeccable executive, the perfect mother, the community leader, had broken federal privacy laws. And we had proof, but we didn't expose her immediately. Instead, we set the final phase of our plan in motion. Michael approached his father, Thomas, for a private lunch. Thomas had always been the quieter, more reasonable parent, often steamrolled by Eleanor's stronger personality. During that lunch, Michael shared everything: the manipulation, the spying, the sabotage, and finally, the HIPAA violations. Thomas was stunned. At first, he tried to defend his wife, suggesting there must be some misunderstanding. But Michael had come prepared with evidence: recordings from the nanny cam, screenshots of accessed medical records, testimony from hospital staff who'd been pressured by Eleanor to share information about me. "This has to stop, Dad," Michael said. "Not just for Alison's sake, but for Mom's. What she's doing is destructive and illegal. She could lose everything: her position at the firm, her seat on the hospital board, her reputation in the community." Thomas agreed to help. Not just to protect Eleanor's career, but because he finally recognized how toxic her behavior had become. He'd spent decades enabling her controlling tendencies, and it was time to break the cycle. The intervention was held at our home, with a family therapist present. Eleanor arrived expecting a typical Sunday dinner, only to find Michael, Thomas, the therapist, and me waiting. Michael had prepared a detailed account of everything his mother had done, presented without accusation but with clear evidence. Thomas spoke about his concerns for her mental health and the legal jeopardy she'd placed herself in. Eleanor denied everything at first. Then she tried to justify her actions as maternal concern. When those approaches failed, she broke down in tears, claiming she'd only wanted to protect her son from making the same mistakes she had. "What mistakes, Mom?" Michael asked gently, and that's when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Eleanor revealed that her own marriage had been her second choice, that she'd given up a promising relationship with a medical resident because her parents had pressured her to choose the more financially stable Thomas. She'd spent decades wondering what if and had projected those regrets onto Michael's choice to pursue medicine rather than finance. It was a breakthrough moment, but not a resolution. Eleanor agreed to start therapy, both individually and as a family. She also agreed to resign from the hospital board and take a step back from our lives while she worked on her issues. For a few months, things seemed to be improving. Eleanor attended her therapy sessions. She apologized to me sincerely, or so it seemed. She began rebuilding her relationship with Michael based on who he actually was, not who she'd wanted him to be. She even developed a genuine bond with the twins, who were now toddlers and delightfully unaware of the family drama. But old habits die hard. Almost a year after our intervention, I discovered that Eleanor had created a fake social media account to monitor my online activities. She'd also been questioning our new nanny about our household routines and my parenting decisions. The facade of change had been just that, a facade. Confronted with this evidence, Eleanor became defensive and accusatory. She claimed I'd been looking for reasons to turn her son against her, that I was the manipulative one. Michael was devastated by her regression, but not entirely surprised. It was time for the nuclear option. Michael had a friend who worked in compliance at Eleanor's firm. Through this connection, we learned that Eleanor had been engaging in some ethically questionable practices at work, nothing explicitly illegal, but definitely in gray areas that the firm's ethics committee would be concerned about. She'd been using her position to gather information on business rivals, including accessing confidential client data. We anonymously reported these violations to the firm's ethics committee. At the same time, we contacted the hospital board with evidence of her HIPAA violations. We made it clear that we weren't seeking financial compensation, we just wanted the violations acknowledged and addressed appropriately. The investigations were swift and damning. Eleanor was placed on administrative leave from the firm pending a full review. The hospital board issued a formal censure and referred the HIPAA violations to their legal team. Within weeks, Eleanor's carefully constructed professional image began to crumble. Which brings me back to that photo on my phone, Eleanor being escorted from her office building, her career in shambles, her reputation tarnished. The woman who had tried to systematically destroy my marriage and my mental health was finally facing consequences. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. This woman could have been a loving mother-in-law and grandmother. We could have had a relationship built on mutual respect. Instead, her need for control had cost her everything. Thomas filed for divorce shortly after Eleanor's professional downfall. He'd spent decades in her shadow and had finally found the courage to seek his own happiness. Michael maintained limited contact with his mother, but it was strained and formal. The twins still saw their grandmother occasionally, but only under supervision. As for me, I eventually became the chief operating officer of the hospital where Michael and I still worked. It wasn't the future Eleanor had envisioned for her son's wife, but it was the future I had earned through hard work and perseverance. Sometimes I think about contacting Eleanor. Her life has changed dramatically. She lives alone in a condo now, works as a consultant for much less prestigious firms, and has lost much of her social standing. Part of me wonders if she's learned anything from her downfall. Another part of me knows that narcissists rarely change, even when confronted with the consequences of their actions. Instead of reaching out, I focus on breaking the cycle. I'm determined to be a different kind of mother-in-law when the time comes. I will welcome my children's choices, respect their boundaries, and support their dreams, even if those dreams look nothing like what I might have imagined for them. Eleanor once told me that family was everything to her. The irony is that in trying to control her family, she lost them. It's a lesson I carry with me every day, a reminder that love without respect isn't love at all. It's possession. And eventually, the things we try to possess find ways to break free. As I put my phone away and look at my family, Michael helping the twins with a puzzle, all three of them laughing together, I feel a profound gratitude. We survived Eleanor's campaign of psychological warfare. We not only survived, we thrived, and in the end, that's the best revenge of all, the end. If you liked the story, subscribe to our channel and share your impressions in the comments. We try to post new stories every day.